Hello, I'm Dr. Emre Karadeniz, plastic surgeon practicing hair restoration surgery exclusively for the last 15 years. And today I want to talk about the topic hair transplant in London versus hair transplant in Turkey. Now I'm using London as an example since I am a UK national myself and I frequently visit London, but you could apply the principles I'm just going to mention to, let's say, hair transplant in Manchester versus Turkey, a hair transplant in New York or Vancouver or Sydney versus Turkey. So let's get into it. So when I say hair transplant in London, I'm talking about London-based clinics, not talking about clinics that have a branch in London. And now, obviously, compared to Turkey, both the number of clinics in London are much less than the number of clinics in Turkey. In Turkey, there are estimated to be about 2,000 hair transplant clinics, but also the expertise, the number of surgeries performed per day or per year are much less. Also, obviously, labor costs are much higher in London than it is in Turkey, in Istanbul. So there is let's say, higher costs and less experience in hair transplant in London versus Turkey. Now let's look at hair transplant in Turkey. So Turkey is probably the #1 destination for international patients having hair transplants. There are a lot of options, thousands of them, and costs are much lower. However, this comes with its difficulties as well. So in Turkey, let's say there are more options and the average cost is cheaper, but I would say the average quality is not great either. So you'd have to cherry pick from thousands of clinics the very few high quality clinics. And you'd be willing to pay a bit more for that, obviously, but it would be well worth the price. Now, let's go back to hair transplant in London. So there are many clinics in London as well, and there are reputable doctors there. But the problem here is that because of the lack of experience, and also I would say as a market, lack of competition, there's a chance that you could pay significantly higher and still not get a premium hair transplant. So perhaps one of the biggest difficulties for hair transplant in London is that you could get a subpar quality hair transplant even if you paid a significant amount. Now, the flip side for doing a hair transplant in Turkey is you could get a hair transplant very cheap. But if you went for, let's say, the average costs are very cheap, then you could also end up in poor quality. So what I'm trying to say here is that whether it be hair transplant in London or hair transplant Turkey, paying higher doesn't mean you're getting a high quality hair transplant, and paying low doesn't mean you're gonna get a poor one as well. So how do we choose? Obviously, more than where the hair transplant is done, it comes down to the skills, experience, ethics of a certain surgeon. So it matters who the doctor is rather than where the hair transplant is performed. But obviously, if you check the accreditations of a doctor and find a reputable doctor, so when I say reputable, obviously this doesn't mean a doctor with very good marketing. It means a doctor with reputation, and that reputation come from international standards, accreditations like the American Board of Hair Restoration Surgery, the International Society of Hair Restoration Surgery. These accreditations and memberships do show certain quality in the person's practice. So these would be international accreditations that you cannot just buy by paying money. So it would require you being tested, written exams, oral exams, showing your results, joining scientific events, doing scientific presentations, and doing this regularly. So it comes down to the surgeon. Now let's talk about costs. So let's talk about hair transplant costs in London and hair transplant costs in Turkey. A hair transplant in London could cost anywhere between, let's say, £5,000 to £25,000. I mean, you could find prices lower and higher than that, but it gives you roughly an average. So if you're talking about a transplant about 5,000 or less, chances are that this price is at the lower range of hair transplant in London, and there's little chance that this will be a high quality hair transplant and involve a reputable surgeon. Now, costs between £10,000 and £20,000, there is a chance of finding a high quality clinic, but you'd have to be careful. But because, as I said, due to lack of competition, you could end up paying for better marketing rather than better quality. So paying these amounts wouldn't guarantee, but you'd would have a chance of finding a good clinic at 10, 20,000 pounds. Now in Turkey, you'd see a price, there would be extremely cheap prices like 1,000, 2,000 pounds. I mean, these are very low quality clinics that I don't recommend. There would be, let's say, middle prices like 3 to 6, 7,000 pounds, and there's a very few clinics that are more expensive than this. Now, I would say that what matters most in choosing a hair transplant clinic in London versus Turkey is the middle portion, because if you're looking for a hair transplant for 3,000 pounds or less, there's only one option. You're not going to have that in London unless it's extremely low quality, and you have to go to Turkey, and you'd be lucky to find a good one for that price, but it's your only option. If you're paying more than 10,000 pounds, then you have all the options open. So you could stay in London and look for a reputable clinic, or you could go to Turkey and also look for a reputable clinic. What I want to say here is that the middle portion, the middle price range is most critical. Let's say you want to pay between 7,000 pounds. Now that's the critical price range, because at that price, you would still find a clinic in London at the lower quality level, but for that price you would find high quality in Turkey. So what I'm trying to say basically in this discussion is that the middle budget range is where you can make the biggest difference, because now that price, which is at the lower range in London, may become the high-end price in Turkey, and therefore you could jump significantly between quality levels. And this would apply to, let's say, other regions, let's say other locations in the UK, North America, Australia, and some other European regions. Now I want to lastly talk about our practice at AEK Hair Clinic. I have dual nationality, British and Turkish, which is why I have a fluency in both of those languages. And I do visit London from time to time when I'm invited to give some seminaries, see some of my existing patients, and chances are that I will open a permanent office very soon. So I'm accredited by the American Board of Hair Restoration Surgery. I have fellowship status at the International Society of Hair Restoration Surgery. And as I said, I have knowledge of the two cultures. My current clinic is in Istanbul, Turkey, but I do visit London from time to time. So that means patients in London could meet me there, perhaps have a coffee as well. I hope this overview regarding hair transplant in London versus hair transplant in Turkey was helpful.